right, so good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to round up today's session and touch a little bit upon how our senses can work to influence our food choices and maybe have a little impact on our mental health. Full disclaimer, I do interchange the words mental health, mood, and emotion a lot. I know we're technically not supposed to do that. You live and you learn, but just to let you know, I am going to do that a couple of times. Maybe not. Okay. I don't have much disclosures. As a postdoc, I am funded by the NIH through a T32 training grant, and I am employed by Monell Chemical Senses Center, so I am pretty biased, and I think that we all should care about the senses and the most important thing in the world. So. Okay, so when I was first asked to give this talk and discuss how sensory properties of food could really affect our mental health, I'm going to admit I was a little bit taken aback and nervous, because while my background was really in taste preferences and using taste to help guide food preferences to then influence behavior change and help people adopt healthier eating habits, I saw some mental health outcomes in terms of reduced stress from adopting those behaviors. But when I was in the literature back in a dissertation period, I really didn't come across anything that directly linked our sensory properties of food to actually our mental health. But as a scientist, I like a challenge, and I really like to find different connections to things. So I really wanted to frame today's talk in a way where I was introducing the field of sensory science and how it impacts our food and nutrition choices, and then sort of creating a story or a framework we can follow that can help us introduce or cultivate different ways that we can apply what we learned and how it can hopefully influence our mental health, mood, and emotion, things like that. So when I first started my research or my little journey in terms of preparing this talk, I dove a little bit in the literature to see what was out there. Is there really a connection between these sensory properties of food and our mood or our mental health? And I came across this article which does tell us that our emotions can influence our food choice, which I think we all know. When we're in a certain type of mood, or we're feeling sad, or we're feeling mad, or we're aggravated or something, we tend to gravitate towards food and select certain foods that make us feel good. So the authors did touch on the sensory aspect within this, and they found what I already kind of pretty much knew, is that we do have this sensory reward from food, and this is accomplished through different neurotransmitter systems. So whether we eat a certain food and we have gabapentin or dopamine, something's going off in our brain, and that in turn is then driving our hedonic evaluation of the food. So how pleasurable we find the food. Do we like the food? Do we dislike the food? But we really mainly see this in sweet foods, fatty foods, and those palatable foods. For example, sweet was a really big thing we talked about yesterday. We do know that sweet can influence our mood. When we are angry, when we are sad, we tend to gravitate and get those sweet foods, and they give us this temporary feeling of feeling a little bit better, and we get happy. We know, as in the sensory world, that the sensory appeal of foods, it's really what's guiding our food choices. So in this one study of about 500 consumers, they asked them what types of things they look at when they're trying to figure out what they're going to purchase at the store. And they found that the taste, the appearance, the smell, and the texture of food were really what the factors were influencing their desire to purchase, consume, and their overall satisfaction of the food. We also know that sensory properties of food play important roles in terms of guiding our food behaviors. So by sensory properties of food, what I'm referring to is the visual, so our sight, how we see the food, the taste of the food, the smell, the touch, the hearing a little bit. I don't know about you guys, my food doesn't talk to me all the time, sometimes, but yeah. But all of those things can actually then influence what foods that we decide to eat and how we choose. So whether this be through our liking of the food, so do we prefer these foods, do we not prefer these foods, or the actual functional role in how these foods play a role in what we eat. So we can see this in two ways, this functional role. There's one way in terms of our vision and smell. This really seems to work before we have the food, so in the anticipation of the food. So imagine you are walking past a pizza shop, or you're at the movie theater and you smell the popcorn, or maybe there's a fresh cut salad or some watermelon or something that's in front of you. You may have not been thinking about that food before, but upon seeing that food and smelling that food, you may be oh yeah, I want that food. And that's those senses kind of playing the role. Then we have our other senses, our hearing, our taste, our texture, the touch of the food. We really find that works during the consumption of the food. So it can really help to determine how satiated we feel. It can help moderate our energy intake. And all of our senses work together to now create this dynamic perception of food that then in turn influences our liking and our consumption behaviors. So from the previous presentation, we do know that our food choices can impact our mental health. So whether we're choosing those nutrient-poor foods, which can have like poor mental health associations, maybe higher rates of depression, more feelings of sadness, more lethargy, or we choose nutrient-rich foods, which tend to give us more energy, help us feel a bit better, have more positive emotions, we know there is some link that's linked between what we eat and what's going on in our minds and our overall emotions. We also know that our senses can also impact our mental health. So for example, we have sight. We think about our visual surroundings. So compare being in a messy workspace versus an organized workspace. When you're in a messy situation, you tend to feel a little bit more anxiety, more frustrated, a little bit more disorganized compared to when you're in an organized space. You tend to be more productive, a little bit more happier. Vibrant colors tend to be able to boost positivity, while dull colors make you feel a bit more anxious. Just seeing a smile from a stranger, for example, can also help to enhance your energy and mood. With smell, we know pleasant scents can help to reduce our stress, our anxiety, promote more relaxation and sleep. And there's a whole world of aromatherapy that really says that different scents can really affect our mood and different things we're doing throughout the day. We have sound. Sound helps to influence our emotional state. Loud noises tend to be very jarring, very startling, very frustrating, very anxiety-provoking, while soft music is more so used to be more calming. Sometimes we sleep to certain music that helps us relax a little bit. And music that we listen to during workouts, we tend to listen to boost energy-boosting kind of music. Touch is a crucial one. Some people, physical touch is their love language. And without that touch, it can have some mental health consequences. We have this idea of touch deprivation or touch starvation, which people tend to have more depressive episodes when they're not around other human beings. The warmth of the sun, a warm shower, all these things can elevate mood significantly. And then lastly, taste. As I think it's pretty much known. When we taste something good, we tend to enjoy it. I don't know about you guys might have something good to taste. I do a little happy dance because, yeah, it tastes really good. Versus when it's something bad, we tend to not really be happy after that meal, and it could have a negative impact on our day. So this brings me back to the question at hand is, can the sensory properties of food actually affect our mental health? So is there some type of pathway that we can pinpoint? Is there a way that we can create certain foods, or we can create guidelines for people to maybe eat certain foods or choose certain foods because of what does to our senses, and can it improve our mental health? So as someone from the taste field and also somebody from Monell, taste and smell are some of the senses that are of more importance to me, and I have a little bit more knowledge in them. So I am going to focus on taste and smell for the remaining of this presentation, but also because we really know it's taste and smell is what creates the flavor, and flavor is what is actually driving those food choices. So this is how we choose our food, because of the flavor, how it tastes, how it smells. And if we have any impairments on one or the other, we're really not good flavor people. So what do we know about taste and smell when it comes to our emotions? So we go back to this concept of sweet taste. When it comes to something sweet, it's always associated with this feeling of pleasantness, this feeling of niceness, this feeling of enjoyment. Versus something like bitter, for example, tends to be more associated with feelings of anger, feelings of disgust. I like to give an example when I speak about bitter is when I'm out in the field and I'm working with young students and I'm introducing them to this world of taste and smell. We have this experiment we do them where we give them a piece of PTC paper, and for those who've had PTC or haven't had PTC, and if you can actually taste it, not all of us can, it's a very, very bitter taste. And I watch their faces while they're tasting it, and their faces go from very enthusiastic to this disgust. And it's like I'm the worst person in the world, and I betrayed their trust, and they're very angry at me, and they don't like it. And I give them a jelly bean, they're happy again, because sweet makes you happy. But we do see that anyone who likes bitter anyone who doesn't has bitter tends to not really be happy. While salty or sour, we have mixed emotions coming from those taste notes. That's more so dependent on if you prefer, whether you're a salty liker or a sour liker. That's where it can depend how you feel after tasting those foods. With smell, we have a little bit different. So we know the smells of vanilla, lavender tend to have some more romantic and some more warm emotions come from it. We also have this concept of olfactory memories of different smells eliciting certain emotions. So in one study, they looked at olfactory memories and they compared those who had memories of fruits, vegetables, and a couple other sweet things, and they found that elicited a more positive emotion in them, versus when they had memories of these burnt and deteriorated foods, they didn't react very well to those. And this was regardless of what the situation was at hand. It was just so having that olfactory memory of remembering those smells was able to elicit those type of emotions. Still, I really thought something was missing as I'm on this journey. While the evidence of emotion is kind of limited, and I really was finding it in one direction. You're choosing the food, and then you're having the emotion. And it's really necessary for us to kind of explore this a different way and think about how can these sensory attributes of food really influence our food choices, and then maybe secondarily, we can look at the effects of mood, emotions, and mental behaviors. So that kind of got me to kind of focus a little bit more on food behaviors. And we know there's a lot in literature that the sensory properties of food can influence our food behaviors, and then maybe our food behaviors, so the foods that we're actually choosing, are what's going to impact our overall mental health. So we'll first start with odors, and throughout my search, I found there was 3 themes that kept coming about when we're looking at how odors can influence what we eat. And that's within our sensory-specific appetites, nutrient signal, and then ambient food odors. So there's research that shows that exposures to different odors can actually trigger that appetite for a specific product or other similar product. So for example, being exposed to a meat or a protein odor was seen to increase one's appetite for meat or other savory related products. Same thing seen in terms of chocolate and banana odors. This increased their choice or their preference for these sweet foods, while also decreasing their choice for those savory foods. If an odor represented like a high or a low energy dense food, then they saw appetite increases for similar high or low energy dense foods that corresponded. For nutrient signaling, food odors are able to kind of signal information about the nutrient composition of the food. So in one study, participants actually had to navigate for high-calorie foods in different environments. So they just had the odor, and they were able to choose or discriminate if something was a high-calorie versus a low-calorie food. And we also seen that odors can trigger the body to have a cephalic phase response and to actually prepare the body for the ingestion and digestion of whatever that specified nutrient was. And this is really due to like the memories you've had of the food, the learned associations. The body is used to the smell. They know what to expect based on smelling something, and the body goes into like, okay, I'm ready to kind of have this food. And lastly, we have this concept of ambient food odor. So odors that one might not technically be aware of, they might have been primed to them before eating, and we saw this in a couple different ways. So they have this effect of priming where researchers have participants be in a separate room where they're smelling a certain odor, and they're moved to another room with the food. And we found that in one study, when they primed with a fruity odor, I believe the odor was pear in this situation, and then going into a buffet after being primed, they were actually more likely to choose a non-desserts, like a fruit-based dessert option versus like the pastry-based dessert option compared to those who were in a non-odor. And they also found, in their study, found that healthy food priming, so just being in the presence of healthy food odors, overall primed more attention to foods. So smelling that odor caused people to take more time to make a food choice. So rather than quickly making a choice and selecting what you want to eat, they sat there, they visually inspected the food a little bit longer than those who weren't primed with that healthy food odor. There's some evidence that this ambient odor exposure can also affect intake of low energy dense food. So I believe in this one study, the third one is that they were exposed to a bread odor, and being exposed to that bread odor caused them to want more of a soup versus having the actual meal at hand. Or being exposed like a warm odor compared to a cool odor also increased their choices of lower calorie food options. And then any overall exposures like some high energy dense foods can also increase food intake and salivation. So on the flip side, when we go over to the taste, we see a little bit different. So taste is commonly associated with our food preferences, and we find taste to moderate energy selection intake, and there are some evidence to support that there's an effect of taste on mood. So back in Lives of My World, looking at taste preferences and dietary choices, we know that there are individual differences in one's perception of different tastings. This taste differences can drive one's preferences, so their food preferences, which then drives their diet, which then drives their health conditions. And we found that just using those preferences or those liking of those foods is a good way to kind of assess what they're eating, their dietary intake, but also correlates well to different health biomarkers. But these perceptions are genetically and environmentally driven. So genetically being, it can affect what receptors we have in our tongue, so how we perceive it, as well as our environment, so our culture, the food we are around, the way our food is grown, the way we prepared our food, all that's going to actually influence our overall preferences and then dietary choices. Our taste quality intensity can moderate energy intake, so taste scents such as umami or the savory kind of place, so like savory kind of taste, have been associated with having a reduction in energy intake and having some improved satiety. And as well as we come back to this thing of impact of taste on our food, on our mood and behavior. So we're back to sweet again. We love sweet in research. And I really saw a lot of this sweet flavor in these pro-social behaviors. So what I was seeing a lot was that people who liked sweets were being scored as being more pleasant. People liked them more. They were more agreeable. They were more generous. So if you like sweet, people like you. If you don't like sweet, people don't like you. So we see that as well. We also seeing a little bit of a mood, our impact on mood and our perception of flavors. So stress plays a huge role. So stress can actually increase our perception of bitter, so it makes things taste way more bitter than they originally taste to us, but it can decrease our perception of sweets, so it makes things taste less sweet. And we think about when we're in a stressful situation, we have this whole concept of stress eating. So if someone is stress eating and they're eating a lot of sweet foods, they're probably gonna eat a lot more sweet foods than they normally would have ate before, which is gonna cause them to eat more food, and they might have some other consequences because now they ate too much and they're a little bit mad. We also know that antidepressants can also alter those thresholds for taste, which can then have an impact on our flavor perception. There is a little bit of neurotransmitter influence going on where you have serotonin and dopamine can actually, one, influence our mood, which then can influence our taste preferences, our perceptions, and as well as our comfort foods. So our salty, our sweet, our kind of fatty foods, the foods that make us feel good. We navigate towards those foods in times of need, and they give us that temporarily increase in our mood, but over time that can also lead to poor consequences down the line. Then we come back to this impairment of taste and smell. So in people who have total smell or taste loss, or have a reduced sense of smell, or they have distortions or phantom smells, we see a little bit more evidence of some more quality of life or mental health issues. So back at Monell a couple years ago, we actually did a survey where we asked people who had smell and taste dysfunction what parts of their life were really affected. And yes, one of the most common issues was things related to food, so their food choices and nutrition, but we really saw some issues such as decreased pleasure and joy and a lot more mental health worries. And this is supported by the literature where we're actually seeing more symptoms of depression in patients who actually have these chemosensory disorders and more poor quality of life consequences. So what do we know? So we know that there is this relationship between senses, food, and emotions. I argue that it's really our senses that are influencing our food choices and then influencing our emotions, but I guarantee you we can put this all in some structural equation modeling and we can probably find some other pathways, but we know that something there exists. The sensory properties of food are absolutely influencing what we eat, whether that be through our preferences or perceptions, but we're really mainly seeing this done in foods that are highly palatable. So the salty foods, the sweet foods, those fatty foods. There's evidence to support that if we manipulate odors in our environment, that can overall affect our food selection. So maybe there's something there where we can put some odors in there that can cause people to choose healthier foods, so like our nutrient-rich foods, a little bit more often than those nutrient-poor foods. And then if there's any type of dysfunction in terms of our taste and smell, that can absolutely affect our dietary behaviors, our quality of life, and our mental health. So what do we need to know to really say, okay, there's a link here, there's a connection here? We do need more intentional studies that are absolutely just exploring the sensory aspects of food and its effect on mental health. So not this like secondary, tertiary question where we just throw in a little random questionnaire there. As Haley was saying in the beginning, we really need to like choose these measures a little bit more appropriately and make that the actual outcome that we're looking for. Also, maybe a little more research to kind of support the ability of odors to promote healthier food choices. And then I have a third one that I honestly didn't think about till this morning, which is sad because my whole dissertation was focused on this topic, but is actually behavioral interventions using taste preferences. So it's like guiding people to make healthier food choices based on what they report they like or dislike, and then seeing how those interventions can then affect our mental health. And in that, I think I am out of time, so thank you.